First, this is presentation. I just want to start by saying thanks to VMUG Berlin for giving me the opportunity to present something which I learned over the last 2-3 months. And I'm really proud that VMUG at such a is so active in Berlin, and Bram, you're also leading it. I really appreciate your time. Stefan, my friend is also joined just recently. But let's see. What I want to just say is like the agenda. Let me just start. Let me introduce a little bit about myself. I'm working for VMware Germany as a consulting architect, and since 1.5 year, and also currently been in Stuttgart. And previously also I had total 15 years of experience, mostly on VMware, started with ES6 host, and obviously right now focusing on VMware Cloud Foundation. So in today's session, what we want to do is, the crowd is very small, but I'm very happy to cover the questions, and it also gives a very good opportunity to make this session a bit interactive. So obviously we ask ourselves, what is in it for me, who should attend, and who is the session planned. Those are the things obviously comes to everyone's mind, and obviously everyone wants to think, how do I ensure I get most of the next 60 minutes or 90 minutes, depend upon how the session is going on. So what I can really say is, like, at the end of 60 minutes, definitely you would learn something little about JSON, what is API endpoint, and very specific to VMware Cloud Foundation is the password. How do you do a password rotation? What is password update? How you can do this with the API call? And with this, I think what I primarily, when I spoke with Brahm, my primary intention is to share what I learned in the last 2-3 months. In fact, I had no such exposure to API calls, Postman, or whatever is available in VCF in specific is not something I have found on the internet, or it's not easily available. With this session, what I plan is, whatever I learned, I'm definitely not expert in this. Whatever I learned, I would like to share with you. And if you have any questions, if you have any specific doubts, anything, just let me know. We can definitely address here, or you can reach me out on LinkedIn or any other social channel. With that, we can start the. I'll just switch off my camera just because uh, this.
Sure, let's do that.
Because the computer sometimes gets really mad. This is Windows. So what I plan to do is, if you see these three icons, let's see, it's my idea of looking at this is from the this is crawl, walk, and run kind of approach. So in today's session, I would be more focusing on somewhere in between this place, crawl, walk, run, something I would really expect you to start as the output of this session. And which will definitely, what my intention would be, if you can really walk and run in this next 60 to 90 minutes, make you do that. I think the next step is automatically triggered if we can, if you understood what I'm trying to explain it. So without further ado, I would just start with something very basic. Now you might say, "Hey, Preet, we already know this basics. JSON is something very new, is not at all new, and some or there are things we don't want to know." But trust me, Jason, you need to know the basic, because there would be a time, if you really get interested and want to do the automation, where you would like to actually write a JSON file. Now, when I say that write a JSON file, I want to just give you some, how do I say, heads up. As a beginner, you don't need to focus on writing the JSON file. You just need to focus on editing the JSON file. Now, why I say this is because I have done this in AWS Solution Architect Associate A-level exam, and there is identity policy, there are IAM policies. Those things are so complicated to start with, and no one told me that you are not supposed to write a JSON file. You are supposed to edit it, understand it, and then somewhere in future can write it. So just that's very important to know. But what exactly is JSON, other than JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notification? That's all. But administrator, what I think is important is to know what are these curly brackets. what are these colons, quotes, and comma. This is all, as a beginner, you should know it. And this is basically, if you understand this, the structure of JSON file, how the JSON is written, I believe it is much easier to find out the problems when you actually try to edit the JSON file. One of the things which I not is not mentioned, it's really not important. If you're coming from the PowerShell background, you are familiar with the square bracket. So square bracket is all um, uh, about the arrays. So though this is theory or something, I will explain you all these four important, how do I say, the tips which you would see when we actually start to read the JSON file or construct a JSON file, and you could see the relation. I would again repeat this what I just said. Then we go to most important part is about the API endpoint, right? To what I would like you to remember, API endpoint is basically a door to a castle. So if you want to enter this door, first you should know where this door is. That's where the API endpoint we are talking about. And second is, what is the username password, or how do I authenticate myself? So their API, this particular API endpoint, for example, um, just a moment. For vCloud Foundation, they call it, they need a bearer token. This NSX, just go with basic authentication. Basic authentication, I will explain all those things. But what I want to drive out from this slide is, all you need to know is how to generate a token or how to authenticate yourself against the API endpoint. If this is all is the basic purpose of authenticating yourself. And once you authenticate against the API endpoint, especially from the VCF perspective, you would get at least 60 minutes, a token which is valid for 60 minutes, and then you can uh, execute any calls. Now, in VCF, there is a RBAC control. That means you can have an administrator account, you can operator account, you can viewer account, which is limited based on the API calls or the rights you have. But with the other, for example, VMware NSX or RE operations or logs, I'm not sure if we have this RBAC level control where you can actually control the how you want to who you want to allow it to execute the API calls. Because the API calls which you're going to make, it basically that the user is so powerful, if you don't know this or you have not done this previously, it can really destroy the environment. It's not difficult, because you just need to um, send one delete call and everything can come down. The other point which you see on the screen is the API client, and this is where we will explore what are these API clients available. One of the things which I am going to focus today is on the Postman, because it's really popular, very popular, and very flexible in using it. And I would say that this the to start as a beginner, think about using Postman, because Postman is very simple to use it. Then maybe a question would come, why VCF and not, why you are starting with VCF and not starting with vCenter, or not starting with vSAN or E6i API, because those are the products we have worked for so many years, and these are the areas we want to automate, right? Totally agree on this. And this is coming from my own motivation, I would say, because when I started, definitely I start vCenter, but vCenter as a product is so old and so much matured, I would say, is that there are not so much possibility to automate it, or the API calls are not easily developed in comparison with the VMware Cloud Foundation. Because, and the other reason to cover VCF very specifically is, VCF as a product is very strategic within VMware, and as a side effect, or should I say as a good output about this, is the documentation of VMware Cloud Foundation in terms of design, in terms of VMware validated design document, or in terms of API call, are so well documented that it's quite easy to start with the VMware Cloud Foundation, to start the automation task from the API perspective. as I said, my journey to APIs based automation started somewhere in June this year. So you could see that it's just 2 3 months, 2 3 months old. But what I could say, it's very easy. Once you get used to this API call, a lot of things will start trigger in your mind what can be achieved. And what I would also, before we, how do I say, let's, whether before we move into the actual demo, I just want to again highlight the point is, people think, right, that hey, we can do everything in PowerShell. Yes, everything can be done in the PowerShell. Definitely, what we see or what we are doing, it is easily achievable, and there are PowerShell VCF Power. Power VCF is a PowerShell module developed by VMware, but I think it's still not supported officially. Exactly, that is what you could also build, or you can customize that module for your own use. Uh, so what I want to say is, like, yes, you can use PowerShell as well, but when you want to talk two different products, like let's say on this screen which you're talking about, VMware Cloud Foundation needs to talk with ARIA operations, ARIA operation logs needs to talk with VMNSX. For this, you can't do with PowerShell uh, what is available even in Power VCF. You need to know the PowerShell API calls, which you can really execute as a one call, which can communicate with all other products. And that's what the power of APIs, especially JSON as a scripting language which is used, right? That is used to exchange a lot of data over the web services, and that's the easiest and very popular way of exchanging information between the web services. And then I would say, like, once this is like my own learning or my own discovery, like, once I started thinking about automation from the API perspective, I started looking at what JSON is, how JSON is structured, how you can edit JSON, what are the ways to edit JSON file. Then there are also now I'm currently thinking about how we can create a JSON file. It's really complicated to start with, but that's fine. Then you, as I said, you can use what we are today learning is how the API automation work, but that is just the beginning. It's like a crawling about it. But when you want to do the scalable automation, like the one which you are doing, for example, I want to create a virtual machine using PowerShell. That thing is not possible in API unless you use some kind of a wrapper around it. That wrapper could be in the form of Python, uh, or it could be PowerShell as well, or or any other language you know it already. But what it has for me has started like, okay, I know PowerShell to some extent. I would prefer not use PowerShell because I would like to use Python, so that I start learning Python as a language. That was the motivation about it. So once I started thinking in terms of API automation, I started looking into other ways we can automate things. And similarly, if you look at the just a moment. Uh, OVF tool, right? OVF tool is um, um, so popular in, especially when you deploy anything into VCF, right? The everything, whatever is deployed in VMware Cloud Foundation is deployed using OVF tool. And as in the process, I also learned, okay, how we can automate, how can you deploy various OVF files which are not deployed automatically using OVF tool. So one good example about this is, if you have in VCF, when you want to stretch a cluster, we don't have any automated way of deploying vSAN witness appliance. So that I was able to was a kind of motivation to deploy it, because it's gave me the idea, okay, what are the things we need to take care, what are the parameters inside the OVF tool. So all eventually started, I started looking at a quite different way towards the automation. And then obviously everyone's favorite is, like, without GitHub, most of the things which you're doing, if you want to work with others, collaborate, GitHub is the best place to start. So I would say overall, once you start any API automation journey, there is a very high possibility you will start thinking a bit differently in terms of how you want to automate it. And with that, we are finishing the slide part, and then let's move to the actual demo now. Now, before we move to that, I just want to give a little brief. Let me just see if I'm on the right screen. Okay. Hmm. So far, if you have any question, as I said, just interrupt me. We can talk, but uh, and just don't hesitate to.
Yeah,
So
Preetam, I have one if you don't mind.
sure.
Yeah, so in the last slide you showed OVF with API. What's the relation there?
No, there is no relation with the OVF, or if you look at OVF. But what I
Mm-hmm,
meant is, whatever is deployed today in VMware Cloud Foundation, that deployment, for example, when we build a VMware Cloud complete SDDC stack, we deploy vCenter, we deploy NS60 Manager, we deploy 3 NS60 Manager, and we also deploy these two things, yeah, and the last SDDC Manager. These are all deployed
mm-hmm.
through OVF tool.
Ah, okay, I get it.
But what I was trying to say is that, okay, while observing this automation, I was able to find out, okay, this OVF tool is also deployed. Can we use this OVF tool anywhere else? And the use case which was there in my discovery was that vSAN witness appliance is today not automatically is not deployed using OVF tool. You can use it to deploy. It's so simple.
Mm,
That's what I learned. And before this, now this is like June. I just said I'm starting in June, and there I'd never even thought about OVF as a tool. So
yeah,
it changes your how you think towards it.
totally. I get it. Yeah.
Then now, what I want to do is, now let me just first start with something. Um Now let's focus towards, like as I said, let's see if we can try to get in the approach of how do we start the step-by-step approach towards the API automation thing. Like it's crawl approach, not the walk and run approach. So that would be quite simpler. We'll go a little bit slower, and if you think you're not able to follow me, just interrupt me. So what you see on the screen is our internal lab here, and in this lab, this is a vCenter. And on the vCenter, you would see there is a developer center. So this developer center is, I think many of us have used it to do this code capture, but very rarely we have worked on this API Explorer part. I have very rarely, I tried this, but I failed. So my recommendation is not to start with vCenter at all. Of course, it's very motivating to start there. If possible, avoid it. Um, Later on, you can definitely move it. The idea is, now you could see here developer center. Now I'm going to actually move my second tab, which is a SDDC manager. In the SDDC manager, by default, you drop yourself, or the default page is a dashboard. But if you go right at the bottom, you would see a developer center as well. And it is same interface which you see in vCenter. Only thing, it doesn't do any code capture, but the interface is same: API Explorer, overview, and code sample. So idea behind comparing this with the other is so that in, like, it's kind of in your memory, it can be easily stored somewhere, that hey, if it is a developer center in vCenter, there is also a developer center in SDDC manager, where you can actually find the information about the APIs. Now I'm directly starting with the SDDC manager, not giving any introduction of VCF. Where possible, I will try to give some ideas about what exactly we are talking about, in case some of you are not familiar with VMware Cloud Foundation. So now what you see on this screen is basically the API Explorer, where you would spend most of your time as a beginner. And other code sample is, actually, you don't need to worry about this one. Don't even spend time here, or there is nothing, right? So it's API, but this is based on 4.5. It's not the latest version, but the API itself does not change so big. This is the tab where this API references, which I will discuss in quite deep about how this page is structured. And and let's see, let's start with something very simple. I would just first duplicate this tab. And we in API in SDDC manager, or the basic concept of workload domain, we always have either a workload domain, or would you and plus a management domain. So what we are referring here, you could see, is the management domain, and it has some host, right? So all information about the host is here, cluster is here, and this under services you would see the vCenter and NS6T cluster. Now you want to gather this information, you can easily go ahead to to the API page and search for a domain. I'm just going to use the search function and API for managing domains. Okay. Now what? There is a lot of things here, lot of things, but I will explain most of them. But there's nothing to worry much. It's very simple. So as we know, if you're coming from PowerShell background, its gate is basically you are going to just read. You're not going to make any changes. So that's what the API says, that get. And right side you see what exactly that API is supposed to get the domains. Second is post request. So it is going to change thing. Every time you see a post, you see a patch request, you see this is somewhere here patch, right? Then it is going to change something in the environment. That's so you always try to remember this. Then if you click here in the get, right, so there are the way it works out is like, you try to remember. I'm going to come back on this v1 domains later on. um, so this, you see there is no description here. A response type, what are the response type are expected? It's same thing like HTTP, when 200 400 500 internal server error, not something we don't know. I think what we always like to see is 200k 200 as a okay message. That's fine, right? Now there are three buttons here: copy JSON, download, and execute it, right? Obviously we would like to execute this button, and since this is get request, you can definitely go ahead and keep sending get request, or try get request. There is no harm in doing that as a beginner. As it says get domains, I'm just going to execute this one, and you would not see any response, but the response is somewhere here. If you click on this side, so these are all responses. All this information is been given as a output, as a JSON file. But don't, again, I would not like you to go ahead and spend time reading this. Just copy this content in the clipboard. That's clipboard sign. Open VS Code. Basically this is already I have copied. I'm going to and paste it here, right? So this is all information which is been retrieved or is been sent to us as a response to our get domain API call. Okay. Now again, what I have learned from my experience is there is no need to read this file. You can actually use a very another method to read this file. Normally people do is, if you're familiar with PowerShell, you simply do something like get content. Oh, it's there already, and the name of the file, which is, so that's the file. We'll get it. We'll read this file, but instead of reading this file, we'll do something called as um, convert to JSON. So this is JSON file is getting converted in a format which PowerShell can understand. So let's say we say info, and here everything got converted. Now let's do a little bit before I jump to the above part. What exactly this is? Let me just show you something. This is again little important. So here, there's everything has been captured in JSON file. Now we just convert. No, this is wrong. Actually, I put convert from JSON. So we had to convert this file from JSON. So it's important that we use the right format. So we got this. Now, if you run this info, the entire file is coming as a JSON file. And let's say, for example, we want to understand or to know what exactly is this domain type, right? That information you could see somewhere, it is hidden here. But if you look at the all info and do the get member, you'll see what is exactly only property is node property, others are method, right? So if you do info and elements, So in elements, you're going to get all these properties with our child properties. As I said, we are only interested in type. So if I do this type, you're going to get the information about what is the domain type, right? So it's a management domain. What I want to uh, uh, say here is, or the takeaway from here is, you don't need to read, you will normally not read a JSON file in a way like, okay, what is here, what we will normally will take this file in some other language, Python or PowerShell, and extract the detail and build the intelligence on based on that. For example, okay, I have asked for a domain, okay, there are more than one domain, and if this domain is management domain, please go ahead and do something. Those kind of thing you can do it. And with PowerShell, like most of people in VMware is actually using PowerShell, because what happens if you know this, okay, this is the vCenter information here. So I can get the vCenter name, and then once I get a vCenter name, I can use a connect to vCenter. And once I connect to vCenter, you can do automation specific to the vCenter. And now let me just compare this file what we saw earlier. Mhm. Just trying to, okay, it doesn't. So going back to the workload domain, we saw here there are services under the vCenter and NSXT cluster. If you go back to this file, it is exactly what you want to see, right? This is NSXT cluster. And if you go a little bit now, if you go a little bit down above, I guess, I'm sorry, searching for vCenter. Ah, so this is the vCenter, right? Now, so you're able to recall or read the information from VCF using a single API call. And now I'm going back to my previous slide, which we talk about how JSON as a file is structured, right? If you look, if I'm just going to open the same slide deck again so that you can relate this. The first thing we talk about is the curly bracket. Now, going back to this JSON file, this JSON file will always start with the curly bracket. It has to start with curly bracket. If it doesn't start with curly bracket, it is just going to sorry, what's happening here? Okay, I moved to different. So it is going to error out, and that's what is very important from understanding how the JSON file is structured. It has to start with curly bracket, and as you could imagine, it has to end with the curly brackets. Quite simple. The next thing, which is again, the moment you start the curly bracket, it has to start with something called as quotes. Sorry, it's comma, double quote, sorry. And this double quote, as expected, has to end. So start curly brackets, the moment curly bracket started, it has to start with quotes. So whatever you write inside a JSON file, it has to be under quotes. This is the fundamental rule. You can keep something, for example, you see true, boolean, or in case of this number, like this is, you can keep this as without quotes. But the other thing, what you see, everything you will see is actually is under double quote. The moment you remove it, you will get the errors. That's the fundamental stuff. Then second thing, which I was going back to the slide, we talk about quotes. So what do you see? Let's say, for example, this particular value. This is actually a key. We call this key, and this is value. So key value pair, if you're seen in case of dictionary object or PowerShell, it's same thing. But key is always, again, as the basic fundamental rule is to put under quotes and then, comma, and then you have to follow this with the double quotes. That's a two, and once key, that this suggests that the key is ended here, and then you start the value part of that. Every value has to either end with the comma. Most of them will end with the comma, or it will start with the curly bracket. Now you could see that curly bracket or square bracket. For example, this is actually a cluster, but it is the array inside it, because that square bracket suggests it's the array, and inside that array you can put whatever information you want. So Going back to the concept which you talk about is to repeat, comma suggests that it's the key value pair has ended, and the moment you that line is ended, and when the line is ended, you start with a double quotes or key or a array. So in this case, it's the array. So this is how just JSON file is structured. These are the basic rules about JSON. What uh, Yeah, so that's all about what we spoke about from the JSON perspective, the array, and what is stored inside the JSON. As I would repeat again, we are not supposed to edit JSON file. We are supposed to create JSON file. We're supposed to always edit JSON file, which I will now, the next example which I will be showing you would actually focus on that part of VCF where we actually only edit. We don't actually go ahead and do create JSON file. But before we do that, right, let me just go walk you through the other one. Any question, just let me know if there are any questions, interrupt me, or if I'm going very fast or something. Now, the other call, which we maybe we are not people here are not familiar with the domains. Let's see if we can, whatever we know as a vSphere administrator, is there something we can be familiar with? So it's one which is cluster, right? So this is again, as you could see, right? The moment you uh, expand this one, the other goes, uh, other is automatically collapse. So this is a bit difficult to execute the complex API calls if you want to do it. So that's the reason we would be talking later on how to use Postman. But going back to this, like the structure, as I said, is same. If you look at this, V1 cluster is get cluster, create cluster, post request, all same thing what we have seen in the domain call. But let's see what we see in the get one. So get cluster is V1 cluster, and it's going to get all cluster. If I execute this particular thing, again, it is get. It says the parameter is stretch, right? And it says describe data type is stretch type Boolean or a data type Boolean, that's true or false. But what you don't see here is, this is again important when you start building your own domains or create clusters, it doesn't tell you whether this value is actually a mandatory value or optional value, which I'll explain you where to find this basically. So since I don't know, you probably also don't know what exactly will happen if you do it. Since as I'm pretty sure it's a get, we don't need to worry about what would happen because it's not going to break anything. So here we see a page of cluster. I'm just going to copy this information here, open in code. Let's see, we create another file, clusters.json. So, and you could see, if you ignore this element part, you see this is the ID of the cluster. That means this has a name and the ID. Okay, and then there is inside this cluster there is a SAN data store, a vSAN a data store, and the primary data store is vSAN. And what you see here is actually not the names but the host IDs, right? So this is what you see. It's a host, how the hosts are represented in the API call. They don't throw out the names of the ESXi host. And then we have this true is default true and is stretch default true. That means it's more or less whether it is a management domain or not. So far what I am trying to tell you is so easy to find out what information is there in the VCF by just simply making a call. But um, we haven't spoken yet about the authorization token. We haven't spoken about the API endpoint, and we haven't also spoken about the API reference call. So what I would do now, I'll switch to the API reference page, which is one of the most popular um, link and very good reference about how to use this vCenter SDC manager or VCF API. But before I go into this, a little introduction about this page is very important because there is so much information here. At first time, you're going to get lost, as I was. So let's So this first thing, you we are right now at 4.5.1. I'm going to switch to the latest one. It's 5.0, which is the latest version of VCF. And under that, you see all this API versioning. What are the API version right now? Everything is on V1. V1 is version 1. I haven't seen anything as V2 domain. This is just an example, by the way. I haven't seen any changes in the V1. If you keep scrolling down, these are the value token, all those return response code which you get it. And the other thing which you see, these are all errors. If you see something, you would probably get why exactly this is happening. I haven't got very good impression about this error messages. So but I will give you some tips of what exactly needs to be checked when you get some kind of errors. So that is a basic summary. But if you go scroll down, this is again something hidden. What is changed in the latest? And this is where you would come to know from the API perspective what has been changed, especially from the API side. Like you could see new operations are added. These are all new operations very specific to the vCenter VCF 5.0. And I'm seeing something I should not be seeing. What is changed in latest from this is wrong, I would say. I need to give feedback internally about this because this should be 5.0. And we got all these changes in the VCF 5.0, especially from the API perspective. Uh, so once this page is done, let's go to, we were in the cluster, right? I will go to the cluster. Now, this page which you see here, let me just, okay. Right, I'm just gonna split this windows and we have this one, I guess. No, we take this one. Okay. Let me, no, we can't change this. Okay. API for managing clusters. You would see most of things what you see on the right side, right? On the, and you could also see same thing on the left side. But my observation so far is there are many API calls on the left side, which is exactly a developer center, and right side there are not much of the API calls. But as long as you see a API call here, whatever you see, you can definitely execute those, and those are supported as well. But going back to the question which I was trying to answer is get cluster is what we were trying to execute this. I'm going to expand this. Now, before I start with something, let me just explain this page to you. Mhm. Okay. So this page is basically is going to talk what are the contents of this page, and it talks about what are the prerequisites. Okay, these are all very important from the, if you want to create a cluster, if you want to do anything, if you want to change anything in VCF, this is the page you have to start always, because this is where you will come to know what is required in terms of changing or sending a post request. So then if you keep scrolling down, these are the example which they have given, by the way, what are required for the vSAN data store. If you want to have another no, primary data store, those things are the given. But let's not get into too details about it. But let me I will explain this while we do the password management. But as of now, I'm going back to this one. Now get cluster, right? The moment you are at the get cluster, this is cluster, by the way, we want to see get clusters. So get cluster is the API call, and you could see prerequisite. There is no prerequisite here, right? There is no prerequisites here. So you can simply, if you go, if I take you back to this this window, right, and if you just go ahead and execute this call, this output was there immediately. But now we will look at the call which really needs some kind of input. So here there is no prerequisite. So this is the, you can invoke it. Now there are two different um, sections to this page. One is always a curl request, and the other is HTTP request. So For the purpose of this today's discussion, let us only focus on the HTTP request. So you will always send a HTTP request. How we would do it in the Postman, I'll explain that. And curl request is more about the automation if you want to do it without any other tool, maybe using some language. But let's go. So always remember, whenever you are on this page, this page will be really big page. If you're doing create domain or create cluster, there is a lot of information, but try to focus only on this one, HTTP request. You will get all information. I will explain this, how this would look when we do the password management. And this is the response. I would say just simply ignore it. You don't need to worry about what this response is unless you are really new, you don't know what is coming out. So, and then let's start the some other, this is done. This is now the second API call, what we got, the get cluster. Let's see what get cluster requires. It says a prerequisite is the ID of the cluster, right? But where do you get the ID of this cluster? I'm just going to go back to the SDC manager. And or rather, let's go here actually, VS Code, which you copied. So if we see this get cluster call, we got this ID. This is exactly the information it needs to get the information about the cluster. But if you run this, for example, we can run this from here as well. So get cluster, it says ID is required and the data type is string. That's it. So once you just v1 as a cluster is the call given, and it needs this, anything which you see in the curly bracket, right? It is basically a value which you need to enter. You're not going to get anything different, by the way. You just get the information which is very specific to the cluster. Just let me see, get cluster, what if there is anything we can discuss from here. One thing I did not, maybe I missed it while saying, in JSON, you can't comment the file. There is no way you can comment the file. But if you have seen that I'm using JSON C, this is very, which it allows you to comment the file. And commenting is a bit important, especially if you are doing some coding. You need to know what exactly, what is the purpose of this file, right? And very important, if you're not using any tool, you need to know what is the type. It is a post or a get request, because that's very important for you to take this input and send it across the API endpoint. But if I remove this altogether, for example, the extension is changed from JSON, it will say this is the errors, and it doesn't understand the comments that way, just as the info. So I'm going to put this as comment, and you could see the same information is coming here, by the way. Not much, but you see these are the availability zone names. 4 hosts are in secondary availability zone and another 4 are in the preferred availability zone. That's like your, when you have a stretch cluster. So that is from the page perspective, what exactly the page is, what are the information in this page. I would not go deep into this right now. We will go into the other, when we go to the example, you'll understand what this, where to look for what information.
Preetam, I have a question here before you close it, maybe.
Sure, sure.
So on this page, on this API reference guide, we have all the meta for API, but we have to input some values in it, just like your SDDC ID, org ID, or something. And when we do it directly from the SDDC, the input is already there. Just like you ran the command earlier, you executed get command from the SDDC page. So there was no input required. It was taking all the input from the same SDDC, right? So that's an ease of operation, or there are a lot of things which you need to come to this API reference guide and do it from here.
I will just park your question because
Okay.
I'll come back to you. You definitely need the short answer. You must come here, actually.
Okay.
But I will explain you. There is little, how do I say, a trick in doing that, which way to go, because I haven't yet gone to something which is important and which is a little exciting, is about the post request. So before I go to the post request, I would just start with Postman, and then we will go to the post request, what exactly has to be done. Okay, so
Sure.
I simply, this is, I don't want to spend more time on Postman. Basically, it will, this session will go beyond 2 hours. But maybe we can think about this session in future, because Postman as a tool is so simple, but if you're a beginner, you are going to get lost in this tool. And there are some reference on internet, on Google, and blog post which talks about it, but I have not seen anything which is very specifically talking about VCF. But the reference, you could use it and build your own, how do you say, you can start from there as well. For example, there is a reference on NS60, also reference for VROPS, array operations logs, and there are some reference on the internet as well. But for the purpose of this, let me say something which is, there are many things involved in this Postman. But to, let's start VMUG Berlin, which you see here on the screen. Basically, they call is that a collection. So if you see on this is a collection, but for our purpose, we say this is a folder, and anything inside this folder are going to get these properties as inherited properties. Just keep this in mind. For example, if you put a permission in the folder, you get those permission inherited even at the file level. That's what the basic idea is for collection, but it is much more than that. Okay. Now, what, as I was talking about, um, um, the token, right? So for to get a token, you first need one very important information, which is the API endpoint. And this API endpoint is the door of a castle. Again, so you need to knock with the username and password. That's how, this is how I see it. Then the API endpoint, especially in SDDC Manager, NS60, and other places, it's really simple. It always the FQD name of the SDDC Manager and V1 and the version of the API call, and whatever is the API you have to request it, right? So this is like a your browser URL. You have to fill in those details. First question comes, where do you find this V1 token? That's the question. We will answer it. Then second thing, as I was talking about, we need to give authenticate ourselves, and that is under authorization tab. Here we are saying, oh, this is wrong. Get token should be actually basic auth, I guess. Mhm. But let's keep it this way. There is, okay. Yeah. So authorization, no auth here. Body. I'll come back to you in this authorization. As of now, we can just ignore this one. Then headers also, we don't need to worry about this. Body is where you'll spend lot of time. This is where you will, if you're using Postman, body is where you will be writing all the API calls, all JSON file you can cut paste here. The important thing is, the moment I'm going to create another just simple, how do you say, a request. So if you click on this folder and add a request, it is first going to just ask what you want to do. Let's say I want a get cluster, or you can put any meaningful name here. I'm just going to say get cluster. The moment you put a get cluster, as I said, you need to do what first thing, HTTPS and the SDDC manager URL. In this case, SDDC manager is my URL is SDDC management rainfall. And as I said, V1, and I don't know what I have to do it now because it's a cluster. I need to get some information about cluster, right? So what we normally just go ahead and do is we have choice about moving to the developer center, or we have choice to move to the reference site. First, I would just go to the developer center because it's easier. So as you could see, it's a get cluster, right? This is exactly thing, exact string we needed here. And once we have that one, let's say cut, copy, paste, and what next thing is we just send it, but it is not going to work because you are not given any authorization token for this, right? So we need to give some token, but I'm coming to that. So here you have either a put authorization token here, like username, password, or you or you can just take it from the top of this folder, which I'm coming back. But the idea, first thing I want to come here, you see is everything is none here. So there is nothing you have written, because for get request, you normally don't send any data, because get is simply asking, hey, do you have this information? We don't tell them what to change. It's get is always about, there is zero thing, there is nothing in the body. You never write anything when you send a get request. So we don't see anything here, and other things are not important, right? So that's how the blank, this is how you started. But now the first thing which we need to find out is how to get the token, right? So token, I'm going back to the API reference site. This is where developer center, sorry, and I'm going to just search for token. Okay, so here is the API for managing and accessing refresh token, right? So we, what is this says, create a token peer. This is what we needed. So I'm going to say, expand this, and you see v1 tokens, right? This, the version of this v1 token. So that's what you see here as well, right? This is the FQD name of SDC manager, and this is v1 tokens. Now when we click here, right, you have to expand this, and this is where Brahm, I was talking about, you need to, this is where little confusion can arise in our mind. Okay, if I click here, right, so let me just first delete this thing. Okay, so if I click here, this is going to get all the field, which is, it does not tell you whether this, for example, API key is optional or it is required. It doesn't tell you that at all. Here in this developer center, this is what the challenge is. It does not tell you what is required, which is the field required. For this, you must visit this site. Without that, sorry, that's another page. Um, so let's go here. So without this, right, you wouldn't know what is the required field. Let me just go. It's okay. So of the left side, you will see somewhere tokens. So if I click on tokens, you would see create token. If I click on create token, it is coming here, and it's saying prerequisite data is required. VCF credentials, user created an SSO, and associated with admin, operator, or viewer role. So this is the role which is required. Username and password. There is no reference whether you need an API key or not, right? So from this perspective, you could say, yeah, okay, I don't need to put the API key for sure. And this is the reason I want you to start. I start here to understand which fields are required. Okay. Now I'm going to pause on this page. I'm going back here on the Postman, and you could see some data I already entered. The question which would start coming in your mind, where do I get this information? What should I get? There are two ways you can do this. One is, I'm going back to the developer center. I'm just going to, I think you can simply copy this file, this information, and put inside here, right? So that is what you could do. This is the, how do I say, is a starting from blank. But as I said, I'll repeat what I said in the early, you will not, as a beginner, not create the JSON file. You'll always edit, and this is where I'm coming from. So if you see here, as a repeat, this is curl request. We're not interested in curl. We're interested in HTTP request. I'm just taking this part, going back to Postman, pasting this information, and putting my password. So if you, this is the password for this one, for the API. So to repeat again, whatever, whenever we send a post request, it has to have a body, and that would always in the body, and it must be in a JSON format. 99.99 case, it must be in JSON format. Now I'm going to make a little change here, important. Every time you, I'm going to change this field, gate. If you change this field and try to execute this call, let's see what happens. Something went wrong, and every time you see this error, right, the first thing you should try to check whether this is the right call or wrong call. Is this get, post, put, patch, whatever the call is? And that information you would find in either place. In the developer center here, it clearly says the post part here, it clearly says this one. And if you go to the developer center here as well, it clearly says what is the type of the call you have to send. So that's where you will learn post request, whether the request is post or what is the type of request. So if this credential is right, if I send this send request, I'm going to get a token, and this is the token which we are interested now. This is basically your username password. The question which would also come in your mind, hey, why don't we see this thing anywhere when why it is not asking this information here? It is purely because we already have authenticated ourselves using this username password. So if you go back to this, now we got this token, I copied this token, I'm coming here on this side, get cluster. This is what we are not able to do it because it's expired. There are two ways in the authorization. So let me repeat it. So we are in the cluster. I'm going to the authorize because you need to authorize this. And the token in this case is a bearer token. So I'm just going to paste this token. And now once this authorization is there, I'm just going to send this request. The request is get, because you are getting the cluster, and send it, you're getting the call back. Exactly the output which we saw earlier in the developer center as well. So that's quite handy if you're executing a lot of calls, which would become very clear when we start moving to the what I call it is little bit walk rather than a crawl part, because there is where we are going to post things. But that's where it's get a little bit interesting, and that's where I'm planning to, that the crux of this entire session is to actually look at this password rotation and understand how to build the API request. Okay, so far we are only on get side. Okay, so now let's see, we want to do something called as get the credential. Now, what exactly we are talking about here is in VCF passwords. You can password for your service account, password which you have rotated or password which you have updated. You can't simply find it anywhere else, find it in any other place other than API call or using SDC manager lookup function. So you have only two options. One is the SSH to the SDC manager, or secondly do the API call. Now uh, let's do the API call to get the credentials. What are the credentials being used in the SDDC manager? So question would come to you, okay, where do I find this information? Two places. First is in the developer center or in the API reference site. I would start with the API reference site. So if you go to the Firefox browser and to the to the API reference site, you will see on the left side there will be somewhere something to do with the credentials. If we click on the credentials, the table will say what are the things you can do as a part of API call. Get credentials, get credential, update password, all those things you could do. So if you click on get credentials, as I said like last time, it is going to tell you what are the prerequisites. Data source, or these are the following data is requested. Sorry, this is get credentials or what? Okay, it says something is required as a part of this one, right? But we don't know, as I said, we don't know what exactly or how to build the API call. And since it's a gate request, we don't need to really worry about what is going to be changed. So where is that API call, right? It's actually on the page itself, which we see. This is exactly what we need, v1 credentials. If I copy this file, I'm going back to Postman because I think Postman is quite easy, is simple to use. So what I'm going to create one more request which says add request, and let's say get credentials. And let's see, this is the FQDN of the SDDC manager. I'm going to just simply paste things here, right? So this is there, but as I said, you need an authorization every time you do it, right? I'm not inheriting from the VMUG Berlin folder. It is also possible. For some reason, it's not working for me. But where is that credential? There are so many tabs which are open here, right? So that gets confusing a little bit. Try to copy this. This should be on the clipboard. I'm going back to this tab, get credential. I'm putting this token again. Sorry. So and there you could just put the credentials. And now again I'm going to repeat it. This is the get request. I'm getting a credentials and I need an authorization. Body will be always empty. Just send it and you're going to get some details as as an output, right? So this is all you get here, right? As I said, I'm not the fan of reading the JSON file, but we'll use some kind of a little smart thing, how to filter this data. So before we go that, what we need to do is now is find out, um, I want to filter the password for ESXi host, let's say, for example, right? So I'm going back to the developer center, and no, in this case, you can't go, you have to go to developer center. Reason is I'm telling you why. Um, I'll explain that when I come back to this. So first we go to credentials. You'd be somewhere here up, right? Now it says great credentials. Same command we actually executed, right? Now you see a little different output here, right? So you see a resource type, domain name, page number, page size. Ignore page number, page size, nothing for us to do. Account type, resource name. Now you would ask, where is this? What exactly this means? Now, if you go back, let's split the windows. So this is here, window is split it. Make this. Mhm. So it's everything is split. Now you see resource name is okay here, right? Similarly, you could see a resource name again here, right? That's resource name. That means you can use these filters when you send the query back to the SDDC manager. Then there is a resource IP. This resource IP, you would also see this resource IP. Then there is another thing which is a resource type, which is again backup is the resource type, right? Now I'm going to expand this window. But what, Brahm, to answer your question, why sometimes we had to move between this API reference? Because if I go back to this page now in the credential part, at least I have not seen anywhere it talks about please use this filtering. Something it says other filters are. It says about it. You can use this search criteria for filter, but it doesn't tell you. It doesn't give any example about how to do the filtering here, and that you only learn it when you get to the developer center and type the resource name. Like let's say resource type, it clearly says ESXi host. If I just put this one here and execute the call in developer center, now what you get here is everything which is ESXi host credentials, right? No point in reviewing this because you have to keep expanding and then you come to know what exactly is
Hmm.
there. So reason I prefer to use some other tool, like my favorite is Postman. That's where we can actually start filtering this. But the next question would come, okay, Preetam, how do I filter this now? It's really simple. What we know is we have in the developer center, I'm going back here, we have filtered it against the resource type, right? So we have to take same thing here, copy this resource type, go to the developer center, and here you need to put the resource type is the key, right? And what would be the value is clear is the E6i host. Now you might ask, how do I know this value is E6i host or what are different values? Now hear me out. This is where you actually can find out. If you scroll down, if you select anything on this postman, you'll see these small gray boxes. And this is, if you scroll down, you'll see all E6i hosts which has the resource type ES6i host. Similarly, if you click on, for example, the resource type backup, there is only one because there is only one backup user in VCF. Similarly, let's see what we can other filter it out. For example, account type service. So you get all these account which are service, account of which is service. Okay. So going back to resource type, in our case, resource type is ES6i host, and I'm going to put that value. If you remember, I said like in JSON there is key value pair, right? This is a key and this is value, and that is what is reflecting here, key and value. Now if I execute this call, it is going to filter on the resource type ES6i host, right? And you don't need to give the authorization because that is already pasted here, and this token is going to be with you for next 60 minutes. So we don't need to worry about the authentication every time. Now if you look at this, is if there is no other resource here, only E6i host username passwords are there, right? Again, As I said, we don't need to read this file. You use PowerShell or some other tool to read it. For us, we just need to some kind of filtering to understand how this data is been represented to us, and then you can start filtering it. So let's go. What is the one more level of filtering we can do it? There is two ways you can look at it, or you can filter it by either going to this place, resource type, domain name. Unfortunately, we have only one domain. We can't do it. We can do on resource IP, or we can do on resource name, right? So resource IP and resource name is actually same, because if it's same name or IP, we can do the filtering based on that parameter. But if you say, okay, can I use any other filtering type, like for example credential type, unless you see, right, that credential type is mentioned anywhere here, it won't you can't put that. For example, if you say I credential type and I'm saying SSH, let's see if it works out, because it's key value pair. So apparently it is looking at, but it's yeah, yeah, its credential type is also accepted here. So all credential types which are SSH are also expected, are reported here. So these are the ways you can start filtering it now. So this is still a get part, it is a filtering, but it's not for every API call. So this filtering is really determined by the developer center. You find out what you against what you can filter out, right? So that's important that you should remember. But then now let's move to something a bit little exciting, hopefully, is about the password rotation. So I'm going to just go back, uh, username, credentials management, get credentials. We already have done this. Now schedule rotation is a patch request, rotate is a patch request, and let's do this thing, right? So I'm just going to copy something from let me copy a call which I already created here. So we'll do one thing. We'll rotate the manager. We'll rotate the password of NSX manager. Now, before I do that, what exactly rotation means? That's important to know. Rotation means you don't give any password here, right? You don't have to give. The rotation is taken care by VCF SDDC manager password policies which actually do it. But then the question which is, so we both, all of us are here not aware how to go ahead and actually execute this password policy. How do we rotate this password policy? How do we rotate the password? So there are two places you can start. You can start with the developer center. Let's go and try this with developer center. So we are completely blank. We don't know what has to be done. So how do we start? We go to the Firefox developer center, sorry. And in that credential, what we want to do, we want to rotate the password. And you see there is no thing called as rotate here, right? But on the right side, you see update or rotate password for all resources. Okay, so there is some way to find out, okay, this API call, which is patch, right, is supposed to give us the option either to rotate or update the password. This is what you would read this line. But how do I distinguish one update from rotate password, right? So rotate is clear. Rotate password means SDDC manager is going to rotate it. Password you would not know, but update is something you set yourself. Now this is very important, especially for our customers or the administrator who are using a non-English keyboards. The reason is, if you could see, going back to this credential which you see here, where was that? Get credentials. For example, here is simple. I'm going to remove this, by the way. You can simply remove these filters. The moment you put this filter, right, you see this query is changing. If you click on here, query is changes. If you remove it, the query is going to default, and I'm just going to send the request again. Now I'm imagine you want to put this password in case there is some kind of a regular situation and you have a non-English keyboard. It is unimaginable. At least I can't imagine this, right? So try not to think about yeah, Bram, we have 10 minutes, right? And I just saw your message. We'll finish this one, let's see. And what I personally don't believe in using the username password, especially for critical accounts like NSXT or something, rather than rotating, we can update the password. This is my personal feeling. But obviously, security teams, security conscious companies would not agree to the statement. But this is what I have personally seen. This is impossible if you want to put this password using a non-English keyboard. English keyboard is still, you can manage it. But let's go to this thing which I was referring to. So how, as we are starting from zero, if you are starting from zero and you don't know this page, this credential page, you can click here. But this has one big problem, very big problem. It's not seen here, is that it always lists everything by the alphabetical order. The problem is, if you do this for create domain, and let me show you this somewhere. Mm, I think create cluster. Let me. I'm going same, a little change in subject, but it's, yeah, I will share what exactly I mean here. Mm, not able to find. I think. Okay, let me copy this. So this is what I was trying to say is, in SDC Manager, you always had to create some IP pools. And you could see that now the IP pool is starting with end and start. Normally, how do we start is, now we always write a start here. And eventually, if you miss this part, you will actually write something like this: 192, 168, 1. And you would never, an API call has one big problem. They will never tell you what exactly the problem is. They will never tell you. That's where this is so important to pay clear attention. And therefore, I don't recommend to copy these things, not to use this, especially when you are a beginner. But you have to combine both things when you are not sure which field is important or what has to go in here, or what are the filters available. The moment you want to see what are the filters available, this is the right place to come here. But other than that, you must always use the reference call. Okay, so going back to this part, like we were at the credential, I'm going back there, credentials, and we want to patch it, and you get these details. The question which would come to your mind: okay, do I have to fill these details? This is where you have to go to reference, and don't worry about filling all these details. It's just going to tell you, see here, it's rotate or update the password. So we are right now at rotate password. So I'm going to the rotate password, and it says name of the resource whose password you need to rotate, type of the resource, credential type of the resource, and username and password, right? And if you don't want to even read this, you can actually copy this file here, and paste it on this side. You would let me just do one thing. Let me just take a reference so that, and we'll move this guy here. And now let's compare this file with what I already have created with rotate, these as the NSX manager, right? So first operation type is rotate. This is clear. Rotate policy we are not putting here. Actually, it does not information. We don't need this one. I'm just going to remove this thing. Okay. And now it is completely matching with this one. Elements, resource type, resource name. I'm putting resource name as the name of the NSX manager, then resource type NSX manager, and the credential which you want to put. So these are all credentials we are putting, but you see there is no password mentioned here, right? Because this is a rotate thing. So other thing which you, I was talking about the array, right? So in you're putting everything in the array here. Reason is because in NSX manager, when you rotate the password of NSX manager, it just does against a VIP of the NSX manager, and then internally it syncs the password across all these three nodes. So you don't need to send this update the password for individual node. In fact, it is not impossible, right? But then if you look at the update part, right? So this is rotate. If I execute this call, actually it is going to read, simply go ahead and execute and update this thing. Just let's do that one. Last one. Hopefully this is the one. And let's start get request. I'm going to say rotate password. Okay, password is rotated, and very important. First thing you need to do is change the get to patch. Okay, why patch? Going back to this page of reference here, you would see it is patch. Okay, so we are patching it using this command. What should be here? Vi credentials. Let's go. I'm not sure about it. So it's exactly Vi credentials, right? So Vi credential is the request. It is a patch request. Nothing is here. Vi credential. Now important thing is body. The moment you change to patch or put, you must change this to body. But you would see here um, all these details, right? We always have to select raw, and another thing we have to select is JSON. Now if I put this, everything is working as expected, this API call. But we need to ensure, is this the name of the resource name is right? So we actually we can check it right away here. If you go to vCenter, I think the name should be right, it should match. Let's see, NSX manager, this name is different, right? So you might ask, hey, how do you know, where do I get this name? If you go to credentials, right, and if you this complete credentials here and search for NSX, right? So it's NSXT edge is here, and okay, NSXT manager. So NSX manager, and there is the name of this NSX manager. I'm taking this NSX manager VIP here rather than NSX manager VIP or something. So if I go back to the body, oh no, sorry, here, I just need to change this thing. That's the only thing we need to change here. And once I run this command now, it is going to go ahead and rotate the password of NSX manager. Okay. The other thing which is I obviously have missed it. We need to put the bearer token. Bearer token probably is somewhere here. This is wrong, I guess. So if you probably it is, and we copy this bearer token, we come here and paste this thing in this one, and now I'm going to rotate the password. But before I rotate, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to just show you right now what you see. This is the password for this one. Now let's rotate this one. So hopefully it is rotate. This is rotate and gone. So interesting thing is, now this is the ID. We need to track it, right? But let's, in the interest of time, not able to show it, but you can see this ID. If you go back to SDTC manager and expand this, you will see there is an ID going. If you click on this create rotation operation, right? Actually, wait, I think this is the ID. If you look at B4 BC28, right? This is exactly the ID of the task which is going on. This is done for you. This is tracking, but you can also track that in the PowerShell, in the Postman. If you click track task, it is not going to. I need the API call for that. Okay, but I will build it that it's not so difficult. So if you click on request, add request, track tasks. Okay, and then V1, and you can imagine that from where I'm coming from task, and task after that the ID. Okay, let us see if this is the right one. I'm just going to say authorization may not work because it is going to ask for authorization. Oh, it's not, because this is again a problem here, because it is a get. Okay, wait, track task get v1 task. Okay, this is another error which you should always remember. This is a task, but actual API call is a tasks, so it won't work. Okay, and this is because it is not able to get the authorization. But I'm just going to do is to copy the token again from this place. Let's say a token copied. Hopefully it is, and we just put that token here. Let's see, it is still in progress. So what happens now is, right now you have to keep So this is get. You can send get requests many times, by the way. You can't send a patch request many times because this is already in progress. You can't keep sending this request because it is going to error out because there is already a task going on. So what you need to do is you have to take this task and copy in the track task, and once you send this request you will keep have to keep sending get till this operation is finished. But then you can also do one very good thing is you click on progress and you will come to know what exactly is in progress right now. If you click, what's where is this? Oh, there is not. So this, if you click on the progress, you will see this is the only operation which is pending. It tells you very neatly what exactly is been updated right now. So this call will finish in another 2 minutes or so, and once this call is finished, it is still in progress, then it will actually give you the passwords which you we would see here completely change. And once that is done, I think we can end our call. Let me just show you that one. Oh, it's just one is pending, but I think I hope you get the idea about how this works out. If
Yeah,
not, I just if not, just reach me out on LinkedIn, or if you want more information, you can definitely get in touch with me via Bram.